Well, welcome everybody to our CMEI Colloquium series. It is a great pleasure to welcome Alice Bragg here today to talk about her work through her non-profit organisation, the World Film Collective. As Alice has written a very nice, succinct little bio, I am going to be reading this to you to give you some background on her work. And please do let people know about the filming of this event. We'd like to just make sure we disseminate the talk here today to as wide an audience as possible. So Alice studied at Cambridge University in the UK. She has a BA in history. And straight after college, she developed scripts for the director, Anthony Minghella, which I personally was very impressed by that fact, and wrote a screenplay with him. Her passion for participatory theatre took her to the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, where she studied the work of theatre practitioner Augusto Boal. In 2007, she studied for an MSc in Middle East Politics at SOAS, which is at the University of London, where she explored the relationship between theatre and politics using Israel and Palestine as a case study. Alice has been teaching young people theatre and film since 2006. She founded the World Film Collective and is the driving force of that, and I think that's what we're going to be hearing about today. And she has been managing and overseeing its growth and running projects around the world. Alice, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. After Alice's talk, Nikit Dasar, as a doctoral student here, will be responding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I really appreciate it. And it's nice to see people I've met already, and it would be lovely to meet in person the people that I haven't. And thanks again for taking the time. So, as Liz says, I'm going to be talking about an organisation that I set up called World Film Collective, and I'm going to be really exploring this statement, how making films on cell phones is democratizing media and empowering marginalised youth. So, just a little bit about me. I know that Liz has said pretty much everything, really, but I left the film industry because I was more interested in the medium of film than I was in the industry, and I went on to do a master's degree. And when I finished that master's degree, I left with the belief that film has a role to play in influencing society and empowering individuals and communities. So, I established World Film Collective with a group of founder members, web designer, cameraman, editor, youth educator, fair trade consultant, and filmmaker and entrepreneur, who was also originally a student. And just in very basic terms, we train local people in marginalised areas to teach youth to make films on cell phones and distribute those films through social media. It's informal education, it's locally administered, it's a learning by doing methodology, it's free to access, and it doesn't require any educational qualifications. And in brief, we use media to give youth a stake in society. With the areas we work in South Africa, Brazil, the West Bank and the UK, and we've done a one-off training in Russia, but that didn't continue as a programme country. That was just funded by a philanthropist in an orphanage just below Moscow. But the rest of the places that we've worked, we've been working there since 2008, and we've got programs set up in those countries. So going back to the statement, how making films on cell phones is democratizing media and empowering marginalized youth. What's interesting about this question is that it can actually be used, it can be divided up to also reflect two stages of development for the organization itself. So between 2008 and 2010, I think what World Film Collective was really focusing on and really doing was democratizing media. And then from 2010 to the present day, it's been focused very much on empowering young people. So exerting influence through making films. So what do I mean by democratizing? Well, filmmaking has historically required expensive equipment, and it's been taught in schools with competitive selection processes. It's been created by production companies and studios with small workforces, and the outlets have been hard to crack into because they've been kind of controlled essentially by corporations and institutions linked to studios and TV channels. So how has this changed? Well, you can now make a film on a cell phone, and most medium-priced cell phones do have cameras, and especially Nokia have very good cameras, and that is the same for most of their range of cell phones. A phone doesn't need to be a smartphone to have a camera function, and advances in camera functionality mean that many phones now shoot in high resolution and some shoot in high definition, and microphones are getting better and better, so literally the tools are at our fingertips. So that's exciting. Anybody can make a film. But can anybody make a good film? Because unless you're making a good film, then it's kind of quite difficult to enter the media. A stat I found, 48 hours of video uploaded onto YouTube every minute, so that's 8 years every day, and over 3.5 million of the videos are of cats falling off furniture. So it is democratizing media, but it's questionable how much impact all of these videos actually have. So just taking a quote from Ingmar Bergman, film as dream, film as music. No art passes our conscience in the way film does and goes directly to our feelings deep down into the dark rooms of our souls. What we were trying to do was enable marginalized young people to make films that did this. So what are we actually teaching? And the pledge at the beginning when we were developing the idea and the technique was to teach young people how to make films using affordable and accessible equipment that they could continue using to make films after we'd gone. And we did this by using cell phones, free editing software, and free file conversion software. So in terms of education outcomes, because it's relevant to all of you, the hard skills, it's very similar to traditional filmmaking outcomes, except that you're customized to mobile, so lighting, framing, capturing sound, then converting files. We teach editing and laying soundtrack and uploading. In terms of soft skills, just to say here, to make the point really that the reality of being marginalized meant that we had to focus not just on hard skills, we had to also look at the way that you teach young people that are from marginalized communities. So breaking this down, essentially telling your own stories, it requires confidence, because you have to believe that these stories are interesting and worth telling. You need to believe that your way of telling them is also worthwhile, and this requires self-belief. And you need to be able to tell the stories badly before you can start to tell them well. So you've got to have faith in yourself that you're going to do better next time. And for people living on the margins of society who have failed in the education system or not done very well, this is actually extremely hard to do. So we had to also create a curriculum, or various curricula, because we've got lots of them, that address this as well. So, I mean, I know from the people here that I've met already that many of you've worked in these kind of communities, but I thought it was worth just screening an excerpt of a film that our South Africa team made as part of a series that was called Uya Funundazi, which is Kosa for Do You Want to Know Me? And they did 12-minute films profiling a person who was kind of synonymous with a common South African statistic that related to the townships, but they would profile that individual. So essentially it was about breaking stereotypes, really. And this was focusing on unemployment. And I thought that this was worthwhile to look at, just because this was really, what she's expressing is very kind of poignant when you're making the point about marginalization. I'm going to flick around these videos a bit, so forgive me if you're watching it and I'm playing around with the time code here, but we don't have that much time. So I'm just going to flick from one bit to the other, if that's okay.
think about like age of 15, 16, no ndiseke isikolo ngela xesha. Endamosha ke like ndachomana nabantu hlala ezitshomini ndingahlala ekhaya. So ndamosha ke ngoku. Emosheni kwam samanje like mandibanjwa bona mandiphinde ndibuye ndibuye. So like ixesha elinzi le.
Okay, and then so you get a sense of her, and then I'm now looking for 831. Ah, it's not actually that easy to see here. Okay, this is pretty much.
No, iphupha lam nalelo uba ngoku like andawuthi sendimamile andinqamanga because andikabina 35 okokuqala, then andikabina 40, but iphupha lam leloba ndingase ndikhulise abantwana bam, like ndiphangele noba ndingaphangela njani, ndibe nendawo erayithi yokuhlala, like ndibe sendaweni erayithi uhlala plus nabo.
Okay, and then I'm just going to come out.
I want to live my life. I just want to live my life. I want to live my life.
Fast money, fast life, peer pressure, with the fuel to the fire driving me out of home to an empty jail cell. Years and years wasted now as I pick up the pieces of my life, I lead the struggle against unemployment.
Okay, so in response to teaching marginalized young people, we focus a lot on confidence building, and so we have a methodology that continually reinforces the value of students' ideas and contributions. And we focus very much on communication, so create an environment where everything that they say has value. In addressing self-belief, we reward them for input, but we are strict about punctuality and about taking care of equipment, because otherwise everything kind of falls apart at the seams really quickly. We try to create quite a relaxed attitude so that we can facilitate team building, because that's something as well that's not that easy to achieve. And then trusting them and treating them like adults is really important in order to build faith in them and faith in others, because that's also something that often they don't have a huge amount of. And in a lot of ways, what they're learning is actually just how to learn. So we filmed a lot of the work that we did in the UK. I'm actually in this. I taught this one because we were piloting it. And I just thought I'd show you just a couple of minutes, not even a couple of minutes, like a minute of this, just to get a sense of the teaching process. I mean, I don't know how helpful it is, but if nothing else, it's quite funny. So this is a UK group. Oh, I should say they were.
Where are we and what is going on?
They were at risk of being excluded from school, and so they were in a stream for being at risk. So we worked with them for 2 years.
Where are we and what is going on?
Okay, let's get this one.
She's coming to the park.
Okay, we came to the park. Actually, wait.
Veronica's coming to the park.
Yeah, so we were sitting here first, yeah, and then she's coming in here.
That's what I thought.
Drink. So, yeah, and then later we're gonna be later she's gonna get drunk. No, first we're gonna be on the road. Then we're gonna see she's gonna get drunk. So
hold on. Did we make a decision? Did we make a decision that the group was going to be getting drunk in the park?
No.
They're gonna get drunk in the.
You're getting drunk in the street.
No, Gita on the street.
You're not getting drunk at Gisan's house, because Gisan's house is Mia's house.
Yeah. Yeah, but what does that say?
I know.
First you're getting drunk on the street, yeah?
We can do that.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
so, where is the scene in the park then?
Okay, stop. Bitch.
That is the scene in the park. Fine. So what happens in the scene in the park?
Veronica's coming to the park.
So first the friends are sitting there, then Mia is coming.
To do what?
To say about last night.
What did she say?
She said, yeah. She says that her mother is threatened to send her back home.
Yeah.
This is day 2.
So we're doing day 2.
We're doing day 2 first.
Why?
Because we're in the park.
Oh.
We're in the park now.
Oh, so are we gonna do day one?
Well, day one is on the street, dear mentor.
Oh.
So really, if we wanted to do day one first, we should have started on the street.
Okay. So just to kind of conclude that section, which is about using, you know, the actual training, before we move on to talk a little bit more about empowerment, I thought I'd just show you some clips made during that period from films that were made, because we weren't just in the UK and South Africa, we were also working in Brazil and we were working in the West Bank as well. So here are some clips from that time that came out of training programs that were basically conducted pretty much like that. I'm going to start at 1 minute because, like I say, we are a bit pushed for time. So, yeah, this is about 1 minute. So this was with the first group we worked with in South Africa.
Mntanam, ayikwazi ukwenzeka lento. Ndiyayazi yona into yakho. Kodwa ke ayikwazi ukwenzeka lento.
Kodwa tatiyazi baba ntwana bayandifuna nje na.
Mntanam ndiyayazi lokho. Nawe uyayazi lo baba nona bayakuthuma. Kodwa mntanam izinto ziyonyuka. Onke amaxesha izinto nyukile. Cela ungixolele.
شو اللي باكسكم الحين ها؟
بصيرش انت تضلك قاعد بلا شغل في الدار.
مو الشغل بالسنه فيا وفيكي، ما احنا دوام.
ما انت بتضلك قاعد ولا بتطلع تسالش على حدا.
ما بنحكي للشباب اي واحد لك كذا شغل، حطينا خبر عند كل الدور.
انت بدك هم يجوا يحكوا لك في شغل، مش رح يجوا يحكوا لك لان بيحلموش فيك.
ولا طاير هذا مع الشغل، ما هو الشغل بالسنه فيا وفيكي ما هو.
بستنى فيك، اطلع دور في ملان شغل في البلد، البنت بدها تعيش بدها تدرس.
الحين مشكلتك المصاري؟
مشكلتي المصاري.
حكينا مع ابو محمد وان شاء الله راح نجيب لك المصاري وما حد عندنا مصاري.
انت بدك تضل تتدين بس عشان احنا نعيش، انت لازم تشتغل.
شو بدي اسوي؟ هي مش مشكلتنا، مشكلة كل البلد هيك.
Okay, so lots of different styles. Now, often, just to say, for example, with that one, they were 16-year-old kids that were just imitating what their parents were doing. And I could go into how we get to that stayed with them, and that's the Boal technique that I was working with a lot in Brazil. But it's a long thing, so if anybody wants to know more about it, then just let me know. So to move from democratizing the tools to create films to then talk about how they become empowering, I'm going to use case studies. So the first case study that I'm going to use is a project that we did in 2010, which covered the World Cup from inside the township communities. So I guess it's democratizing in that it was aligning with the mainstream, because it was this big event that wasn't necessarily inclusive of the township communities. But we did a project that enabled them to report on it from inside their communities and from on the streets. This film was made, and I think what's interesting about it is it really shows the difference between the kind of films that we're making and the kind of the filmmakers that were covering the World Cup event in a professional capacity. So I just thought this might be interesting as a way of introducing the project and some of the people that were in it.
Myself, I work for a company called Gather Images. We are currently working on behalf of the OC, who are documenting the event purely on a legacy level. In Germany, there are so many photographers now that most angles do tend to get covered. The bigger agencies tend to have maybe 6, sometimes 7, maybe even 8. And whereas the smaller agencies are either lucky to have someone in the stadium, or 2, they maybe have 1 or 2.
It was good. We got some good box pops, especially from the Paraguayan fans, and then we got nice clips, nice sequences of people going in the toilets and people coming out and people doing their business. Sad face. You know what I mean?
The emphasis on editing now is with the photographers because of the technology involved now, and they very much can control their own destiny. It's pretty much instantaneous. You can look at your pictures from the camera, or in camera, or on a laptop. And so, yeah, it's pretty much done by the photographers now.
No, we're done with the mess report, and we're almost done with the laptop.
Say again, sorry?
We struggled. We tried to use it as leverage also and trying to get into the clubs and pubs. The security guards said, no, whatever. Like, we student filmmakers, yeah, sure, we understand, but whatever, you're not gonna get it. You're part of the public. So that's that.
Now, we got tickets for one match, and they went to cover that match, but the rest of the time it was very much about covering what was going on in the township communities and what was happening on the street. So this is a film that just gives an example of that. They had their own tournaments. A load of young people had their own tournaments. So again, I'm going to chop around this.
Really Kamalam Tulan and the Lapa is primary schools, Lapa Subula tournament. It's like your father in the World Cup, but later about this China, about China. Country like Chile, qualifying USA, Italy, so Subula tournament. Bauki Tarajani.
Okay, and then I'll just skip along to, it's really hard to see the time code here, about here. Okay, I'm going to move this a little bit further along this.
I'm the air torn out, but I score 3 goals in a match.
So, ik zei, hoe moest ik dat doen? Nou, film zijn.
Ja, dat is niet. Dat is niet zo cheap.
We are expected to win this tournament. We are expected to take this cup. Cameroon!
Cool. So that's they made like 80 of these kind of reports. They made sports reports from inside of the shebeens, and they made they made reports about using cell phones at games because they were big public games with huge screens, and we made reports about vuvuzelas, and then they started to make news reports about the local shebeen being closed down, and then they followed that and did a kind of follow-up report on that, and then they did reports on just general poverty, and so it kind of snowballed, and they did masses. Over 80 reports went on this website, but not a huge number of people saw those. We did get some on the community television channel, so people did see it through that, but we didn't, essentially the empowerment side of it on an individual level was very effective, but they turned around to me at the end of it and said, well, what happens after this? And so we selected 8, and we created a production team called Mopix. This is the original production team. You might recognize a couple of the guys from the video, from the film. They were editing in this guy's shack. So a film really does only have an impact if people watch it, further than what the individual gains from making it. So I'm really going to, obviously you can go into traditional media, TV and cinema, and that's an option, and we've done that. But I'm going to talk here about social media because that doesn't require these young people to have the kind of contacts and networks that we have, which has enabled us to get things on television. So the second case study is, it's the production team that we worked with before, and they designed a platform on a mobile social network called Mixit. And at the time, there were about 27 million people on Mixit, and it's a BB chat, so it's small incremental payments to essentially chat with each other. And we had a platform with the filmmaker profiles, skins. We did 2 3-month series, 4 one-minute films per week. We told local stories featuring local people for a local audience, and we had a chat room, which became the most popular chat room on Mixit. So, empowerment. They were empowered by becoming a production team operating within the community. Obviously, this is a kind of mainstream occupation that requires entrepreneurship, so that was very empowering for them. They became community educators and a conduit for the community voice. They enabled the community to communicate with each other and with other communities across South Africa, because Mixit's South Africa-wide. Well, it's Africa-wide, but it's South Africa-wide. And a lot of status came from this, from within the townships, and also the way I realised the kind of status that they were gaining from it was because we were offering skins and we were offering wallpaper, and one of the most popular downloads were the skins of the team. People in Pretoria were downloading it, in Durban were downloading it, because you get all the stats, all the analytics. And I asked the team why, and they said, oh, because, it's a group of young people who are doing it for themselves. And it was very interesting what happened. So I'm going to show you a couple of the films. This one was a series, from part of the first series that was called Grannies with Balls. And it was celebrating the life of the community and the effectiveness of community networks for older people.
On this episode, we yet again see culture grannies with balls making their way to the stadium to participate in the ball game. Shoes off. Go!
they made 12 of those over the first series, and they did all sorts of athletics, and then they would compete against another kind of older senior aged athletics group, and so it was brilliant. Actually, it was so great. And then they did another series called Closer to God, where they profiled a different religion every week for 12 weeks. And this is the one that they did on a Sangoma, which is a kind of witch doctor.
I felt like I was being haunted, but then it was the calling itself needing me and needing me to answer to it. They give you the powers and they don't disappoint you. To speak with Mbepa, putting the snake around, calling my sisters first, and then I'll go to God and then I pray, lighting 3 candles. The yellow one symbolizes my ancestry, and then the red one means fire, that everybody who's after me can be burned out. And then the white ones is the spiritual and the Holy Ghost.
I believe that my ancestors are my forefathers, my messengers, my communicators, what they tell me to do on earth. But they are not my God. They are my guiders. My God is the Heavenly Father, God, Jesus Christ. So what they do in order together, which is why I light 3 candles. First, I call on my fathers to come and listen to this. And then they could be the transporters to God and help me when I pray, that He could answer all my prayers. Because they are alive and their customs are alive.
So they covered every sect of Christianity, they covered Islam, they covered Judaism, they covered pretty much anything that they could find somebody who would speak to them about the religion. So they did that. And then they also gave a platform to local poets and local rappers. And this is one of the ones that they did.
These tears I see, cause of the TRC. It's these tears I see, cause of the TRC. It is these tears I see, cause of the TRC. It is these tears I see, that nobody is wiping away. Please understand my stance. I'm not prone to violent outbursts, but the simplicity of my articulation seems to elude you, and my remote control reality is a fallacy I detest. I constantly win accolades for my prowess in your language, but I still languish in a prison of distrust. I was once told listening is a skill, so it's your turn now to listen to me. All I've ever wanted from you is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me, my so-called God, because the sanctification of Utatu Mandela is not enough, Nyasniel. Mothers and fathers are still wailing like Bob Marley or Peter Tosh. So please understand our stance. We're not radicals who carry guns. All we've ever wanted was the location of the bones, so as to take them home.
So they would take a rapper, a poet would come and want to be on Word Is, essentially, and then they would film them rapping, and then they would add cutaways that were relevant to... So they might film their own cutaways, but obviously, in this context, it made more sense to find stuff online. So the next case study is a project we did in the UK called What We've Done. I mean, again, by this stage, we've moved from just teaching them how to make films. They're now creating a brand for their channel. They're now creating an entire sort of social media network, distribution network. So we identified 4 main causes of the riots through group discussion and market research amongst local youth. So they went out with 10, and then they got the 4 that most resonated with local youth. And they created 4 concept series off the basis of these causes that were interactive. They developed a social media strategy, and they built a community around youth perspectives on police stop and search in particular. That kind of arose as one that they were going to focus particularly on, and relations with the police was one that was identified by young people as being very important in terms of understanding why the riots happened. So empowered by the space to articulate their grievances and be listened to, often for the first time, the chance to think like agents of change and to imagine that they have power and could decide what they would do with it, to understand that building a community of support enables them to make a wider impact, and beginning to understand that their voice has a place within a national debate and that they can communicate that voice through making films. So I've broken down those points and selected media that illustrates that. So this is the space to articulate their grievances and be listened to. This is one of the students on the program, a guy called Aaron, and he's essentially talking about his experience of being one of his many experiences. He's actually stopped 11 times in one day, but one of his many experiences being stopped and searched by the British police.
When I was stopped and searched, this is what happened. I was in a shop, in a corner shop, newsagents, and obviously I was walking down there before, innit? I was walking towards the corner shop, and I've seen the van come in, so I'm like, okay. I've seen the guy in the van look at me. I'm like, yeah, I'm about to get stopped and searched. I already knew that. So I walked in there, buying my stuff, and then they come out the van, innit? And they come into the shop and drag me out the shop. And they say they're stopping and searching me on drugs because they said the area that I live in is known for drugs. And it was quite aggressive. They didn't even ask me to leave the shop nicely or calmly, and they literally came in, put their hand around my arm and dragged me out. And then they stopped and searched me, pat me down everywhere. You know, same old. And then they told me, that they're just doing their job. But it's like the lack of care, like they didn't even want to engage with me, like I wasn't a human being to them. I'm just one of them criminals. I'm not criminal to them. I'm already guilty, even though I haven't done anything. So yeah, that was my experience, and it's frustrating.
So, to understand, the second empowering factor, to understand that building a community of interest and support enables them to make a wider impact. So, like I say, we've moved from just creating films, they're now creating a logo, that's their logo, they've got a website, they've got a Facebook page, they've got a Twitter page, they've also got a YouTube page, but I haven't put it up there. So yeah, the chance to think like agents of change. We did a big exercise on if they could create an ideal vision for relations between police and young people, what would that look like? And they came up with a load of ideas, we wrote them on pieces of paper, we stuck them on the wall, and then this film was made on the basis of that.
Everyone's scared, like, so not just me scared.
The streets are very sticky at the moment, it's true, man.
For them, because we got nothing to do. What we got to do? Go on the street, well, what we got to do? They ain't giving nothing for us, they got nothing for us to do, so we just go on the street.
Area like Peckham and Brixton, they don't like each other, so like, if a Peckham you come walk in here, yeah, so that's over for him, innit?
What's your name? So I'm obliged to give you my name. Do you want to tell me it? Am I obliged to give you my name? Tell me. Am I obliged, sir? Yes or no? Do you want to tell me? Am I obliged? Do you want to tell me? Am I obliged? Yes or no? If you answer me.
Everyone said what? No one ain't doing crime anymore. We're just gonna do, we're gonna make bare businesses and we're gonna go hard. We're gonna build our communities. Let's say what? No black on black.
So, I'm really conscious that they're really heavy UK accents, so you're probably not picking up a lot of that, sorry. Yeah, I didn't really even think about it when I put it in. This is another understanding that essentially what was going on in that was just kids saying, there's nothing for us to do, so we hang out on the streets, and then the second load of kids said, there are problems between Brixton and Peckham, as in two areas of South London, because there's a lot of postcode wars, like I think there are in Los Angeles, we get quite a lot of that in the UK now, so you can't move between these two areas. And then finally the guy at the end was saying, you know, we're trying to make things happen, we're trying to set up businesses, and then the response that we get to that is, what do you mean no black on black violence? So I can see that it's quite hard. Understanding that their voice has a place within a national debate and that they can communicate that voice through film. I'm not actually going to show this, but essentially what happened was we kind of got lucky when we were doing the project, and it coincided with an academy in the same location as us. And they ended up interviewing a lot of very famous actors, musicians, people, presenters that were very youth, kind of very well known in the youth arena. And this is one, he's called Ashley Walters, and he's otherwise known as Asher D, and he's a mega star, and he was just in the same building. And we interviewed him about being stopped and searched. I mean, I'll play 15 seconds of it so you get the sense. But what started to happen was that he, along with a lot of others, were really articulating what these young people were feeling. And there was really a sense that they had, it was hugely empowering, because that by making films, they'd been able to capture the voice of somebody who did have a national, if not, I mean, certainly a national footprint.
Things are allowed from police that, you know, they're directly they're not allowed to do. But I think, I mean, personally, my opinion is that at the moment, the police are the biggest gang in London. There is no bigger gang than that.
Have you been stopped?
So, oh yeah, and it was just we wanted young people to send in their own videos. So, for them, yeah, I mean, we can talk more about that later, but that's essentially what they were doing. So, empowering globally, so we've done the community level, national level, and then global level. So this is the final case study, and I need to hurry up really. So it's this Culture Pioneers, which is in South Africa. This is something that we did quite recently. So we built on HIV prevention awareness messages that were in a curriculum already to enable students to make films that articulated these messages to a wider constituency. So we worked with Grassroots Soccer. They had HIV prevention awareness messages using soccer. We took those and we made them the centre of a filmmaking curriculum. So we built an online community around these films using Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and we learned the lessons from what we've done. So we just built on what we've been doing always. We ran a campaign to get tested and know your status, and that was sponsored by Nokia, which was brilliant for us. And we ran a second campaign to get tested, which took social media distribution further by launching an app. And the handout that you've got is how to access that app. It's not an amazing app, but it's an app. So we were quite pleased about that. Empowered by addressing a subject that's taboo within the community and enabling people to talk about it in their own voice and on their own terms, which for HIV doesn't happen very much in those communities. Making films that have a fresh perspective on an enduring subject, responsibility for addressing the crisis is put into the hands of those who are living with it, changing mindsets by talking to youth in language they understand and can relate to, and evidence that the message is getting through, and informing global HIV organisations on the perspective from those living on the ground. So again, I'm going to break that down and just show you media that sort of evidences that. Addressing a subject that's taboo within the community, enabling people to talk about it in their own voice and on their own terms. This is quite shocking, so I do need to prepare you for it, but it's one of the videos that was made, and it's men talking about, it's young men talking about HIV, and it's talking about using a condom. Actually, maybe I'll do that bit. Cool.
Welcome to the
I don't know. And you come back over to my city, I mean, the economy effect economy
Okay, so you can see that we said it had a genre which was called culture talk, and it was about getting groups of people together and talking about subjects that were related to HIV, and this obviously is quite a big one, and what comes out of that is essentially a lot of really important information about why there's still such a prevalence of HIV and why it's still spreading at the rate that it's spreading. So responsibility for addressing the crisis puts into the hands of the people who, I don't know what's happened to that, but put in the hands of the people who are living with it. I've taken this slide as an example of that. We had a very active Facebook conversation as part of this project. And this is just one of the conversations that they were having. So if your partner, they were asking questions once or twice a day. If your partner does not want to get tested for HIV/AIDS, what do you do? So you can see here, I'll just run through it really quickly. So the first guy says, well, ask her why, and I'd probably not have sex with her again because now it seems she's hiding something. And then Ask Culture Pioneers says, well, why are people scared of getting tested for HIV/AIDS? Because obviously what they're trying to do is, the campaign is to get tested to know your status, because the idea is at least if you know, then you've got some control over stopping the spread of it. I don't know, but maybe they're not brave enough. Look, testing for HIV is not a joke. Just because your status can change your life forever. I'm having the same difficulties. I've just tested 2 weeks ago for the 8th time, and my partner still hasn't tested. I've tried all avenues trying to convince her to come, but it's still difficult, and I don't want to lose her. Sim Khalili, here's a lot of Kosa. Don't blame her. Take her to counselling so that she can understand better. And it goes on, and then it turns out that another person in the conversation also had the same problem with the partner, but then he gives advice to sit down and talk about it, and then she did get tested, and now they're engaged. And what we saw was really fascinating, essentially, was that there was a lot of self-agency. So then the Mixer app, which you guys have got access to, so you can see all of the comments. I mean, we were really blown away by a lot of the comments that came from the app. I mean, it's a taboo subject, so people don't tell each other that they're HIV positive, but they were doing it on this app. So I'm living with HIV, and I'm happy that I admitted it. I think what you guys are doing is a great job. I'm HIV positive and I want to know more. I'm HIV positive, I want to join you. So that was really, it just felt very exciting on that level, because I don't know to what extent you get that kind of or people have been able to get that kind of update with the HIV kind of awareness and HIV education that's been done in the community before. So informing global HIV organisations on the perspective of those living on the ground, again, just a snapshot of the Twitter site that we were using. One of the students at Mother to Child HIV, check out our video about women who struggle to breastfeed the baby because he's HIV positive. Thanks for sharing. So thanks for sharing, and what do you think? And the idea is to, over Twitter, to speak to global organisations that are dealing with HIV and to say, have a look at this, because this will tell you what men, kind of 20-something men in townships really do think about condom use, or have a look at this, because this will tell you what school children think about condom use, or have a look at this, you know, this will tell you what older people think about having HIV children and how. So it's a massive amount of information. Now, I'm aware that I've gone over. I was going to show you this is probably the best film from that series, but I think it's too much, really. So I'll probably just move straight on to the conclusion, which is to go back to the question, democratizing and empowering. I think this kind of filmmaking and the social media distribution that comes with it is altering the role and relationship of the media to society and of society to the media. Altering the role and relationship of media to society, well, I think media becomes a way for ordinary citizens to build support groups, discuss ideas and lobby for change, and anybody to do that. And then altering the role of society to the media citizens using media as a tool to gather information from sources we feel connected to and as a medium through which we interact to find solutions where we can. So that, I think, is the end of the talk. So thanks very much, and I'm sorry I went over a little bit.
Thanks, Alice. I was taking copious notes. Yes, actually this microphone's on, so if I speak right here, I should be on there. So since we're such a small group, I think what Alice and I talked about the day before yesterday was also how this presentation and putting out this knowledge to people here could be useful for her. And so I'm going to give some of my own thoughts, and then maybe we can open it up for questions, and we can finish with any thoughts that you have about where Alice and her organization can go with this kind of work in the future, and any theoretical perspectives that you have about that would fit this kind of work. And so I was really struck by the conversation of democratization, because for me, being in the ed school, we talk about access and equity all the time. And in a lot of ways, Alice, what you were talking about democratization was this idea of access. And the fact that part of the foundational assumption of the World Film Collective is that marginalized youth, and I think we need to challenge the use of the word marginalized in some ways as well, which is a larger conversation, of course, but marginalized youth don't necessarily have the capital to invest in this kind of training, and that they don't have access to these resources, so that there's a lack of access not only in resources but also social capital, and that democratization is a space or a way to change that, to allow more access, whether it be through social capital or whether it be through actual resources. And what struck me was that concept that was presented was in juxtaposition to the concept that cell phones are at our fingertips, right? So we are now in a time when we are dealing with these two conflicting senses almost. One, that we do have access to a lot of social media, a lot of these marginalized youth, and I'm putting that in air quotes, love air quotes, have access to social media, have access to Facebook and Twitter, and they have access to cell phones. And so my big question was, I'm trying to channel Freire here. Why didn't this emerge from these youth themselves? And that's a question that I posed to Alice and her organization. I think this is really useful work, but I think we also need to question is, what was missing that your organization fulfills within the space of democratization of this media? And I think it's an important question because it leads to interesting things for your own organization to challenge as you move forward into the future of this work, which I think is amazing, the kinds of things that you can move forward with. The second is this idea of empowerment. And what I thought was amazing was that through all the examples that you used, there were these two strands of empowerment that I found. One was empowerment as expression of individuals, and the other was empowerment as exposure to a wider audience, to a national, regional, even global audience, as we saw at the end. And this idea of empowerment as expression for the individual, for me, harked back to a lot of work that I've read on perspective taking, and how this process of creating films allows these youth to reflect on their lives. And partly, I think it is because of the kinds of techniques that you use, Alice, and I'm personally really interested to know, was it Ball? His own techniques, and how he goes about this. Because I think the lens, the video, gives them a space to separate themselves from their lives and reflect back on that, which I think is very powerful, and which I found in my own work working with kids, is that when they took photographs, the lens almost gave them a space to step back from themselves and their lives and reflect back on their lives. Sorry, I have to stop. I feel like what I said earlier might have been misconstrued or hurtful, and I'm sorry if that was it. I was just challenging something that you had said. So I'm really sorry if like what I said about democratization was like harsh. I don't know why I get that sense, but I'm going to continue. And so I think it's going back to this idea of reflection on their own lives. I think in that process, that mode of being able to separate themselves from their own lives allows them to not take perspective on their lives. So individually, to think of their lives as from an egocentric perspective of I'm being in it, to looking at their lives from the second person perspective and reflecting back on that. And I think that serves a therapeutic role, but it also serves a broader role in society for youth to start getting critical about how their lives are affecting other people's lives. And so I think that's a very powerful tool, this tool of being able to separate yourselves. And we see that a lot nowadays with social media. We complain a lot about the youth oversharing, about too many pictures of cats on YouTube, which are all for Sylvia, by the way. But we talk a lot about how bullying now happens a lot on social media, how there's a lot of oversharing on social media. And that, I think, is the negative end of this. But I think there is a positive end to this as well, because it gives us a way to give youth a tool to reflect back on their own lives, which I think is very powerful. And the second part of empowerment as exposure. And I'd actually like to put Alice's, the different examples you presented. I saw a trend through all of those. The first being this idea of seeing, that there needs to be a certain amount of exposure. Like if nobody sees this video, it doesn't have any effect. So for me, the first was about viewing or seeing. And then it went to the idea of recognition, that in this process of seeing, people needed to recognize their own lives or see themselves in the video in some way and be able to put that back to the people who'd made it. The third was then to react to these videos. So after viewing them, recognizing a strand of truth in them, it came to reacting about it. And then maybe acting about it. So we I don't think we got I had an example from one of your videos where there was action about it, but I can't remember it now. And the last, which we'd hope after viewing and recognizing and reacting and then acting, would be to create some kind of change, right? So hopefully at the end of that HIV example, through that social media, the organizations that are now being able to have access to youth voices through that media would be able to use that to change their interventions in some way to make them more targeted or more specific. And so I think that there are this broad strand of democratization that we need to challenge, and then there are these two strands of empowerment, one of expression and one of exposure, that I think the organization can capitalize on even further. And those are my thoughts. Those are how I made sense of what Alice presented today. I've been speaking very fast, I know. But what I'd like to do now is just open up and see if anybody has any questions or clarifying questions about the work that Alice does, and then move into a bit of a discussion of how this work, how we as academics would make sense of this work. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shinta. I'm a conference first fellow in MIT. My background is mathematician, but urban planning. And my question is, I see that your work mostly is South America, South Africa, Europe, and UK. Do you have any work in Asia? Because of, why is it because of the theme that you choose, or any reason?
No, it was quite random really. They were just places where we had contacts. So we just started in 4 places simultaneously in 2008, and then just places where we already had presence. And linked also to the founder members. So I was working from the offset with people from places that we developed programs on.
Well, that's another thing, because I think Alice and I were talking about to make sure that everybody knew that she's really open to people from Harvard and MIT collaborating with her on these kinds of projects. And so if you have contacts in Indonesia, I'm sure she'll be really happy about it.
I work in NPO, it's called Bandung Creative City Forum, and we will have event this year. The idea is gathering all academic and professional, like exam something like that, to make an impact, to gather youth and children mean, film as a media to democratize urban planning, urban design, and to engage children to see what they're thinking about the city and the
So I have many thoughts and many feelings, and so please forgive me by the things I'll say it's disorganized. I'm all over the place right now, but I'll just try to say at least a few. It's very clear to me how this is like a very important tool to promote empowerment, and it really has an amazing potential to do that. I see that I can see how your organization can really strengthen the educational component of this, because it seems to me maybe because the presentation is short and we were focusing on the videos specifically, like I would love to learn more about what exactly is that you do, how long do you meet with these people, with the children, for how long, how many hours, what do you exactly talk about different than the, you know, how to create a video, like all the cool part of what you're calling the hard skills of filmmaking, but like, what are you doing to do some of the things that Nick is talking about, you know, so okay, so maybe these things that you just capture are reality, but what are you doing to actually help them reflect on it? Maybe that's something you're doing, but we didn't discuss much, but I think that it's almost like the creation of the film and the watching the film is, I feel like it's like the beginning of something that, for that to be called empowerment, like the reflection part and the take action part would need to be present. I'm not sure, but I think it really has a potential. Now, one thing that I have to say kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm very concerned about, for the video you said it was going to be a little shocking. I feel like it was a little shocking, because suddenly that's the type of, like, did you explain to these people the risks of having that type of conversation, and that was going to be shown all over the world and they're going to be taped, because they are really the type of individuals that seem to be already marginalized, and they're talking about these things that have like very potential, like, negative consequences to them, and still, like, they're talking openly in ways that, in a way that I know that if this was being done as like a sort of research, an IRB committee would put you through hell to make sure that they are actually providing consent to authorize that, so I wonder, what are you doing to have a conversation with the participants of your videos about what's going to happen with the video, and what are the potential risks of talking openly about issues that are so sensitive that will be disseminated in a website?
So I'll answer the first question first. So in terms of the education component, you're right. There wasn't enough time to go into that, and that's something that's been developed over the past 5 years. So, kind of broad strokes, it started as 50 hours that was repeated 4 times. That worked to an extent, but it was then really decided that you needed to just work in a single block. So what we then did is we extended it so it became, rather than 50 hours at kind of any configuration that worked for the student, so 50 hours could be over a year, or 50 hours could be over 2 weeks. It then became about engaging with them for a month or 2 months, and then 3 months, and now 6 months. So what we've kind of led up to is 6 months full-time with progression opportunities that are bolted onto the end of that. So it's very much more developed than it was when we started in 2008. In terms of the reflection and the take action, I mean, I do understand what you're saying, but I think that the process that they go through in order to author a film requires a I think that when they go and they make documentaries, for example, short documentaries on subjects that they've decided are important and they want to communicate, then again that's about exploring the subject by speaking to members of their community, and they're taught to do that in a way that has, you know, journalistic objectivity. So I think learning how to make a film involves quite a significant degree of self-reflection, and I know that from being a scriptwriter myself. If you have to write a script and get into characters, and if you have to make documentaries and speak to people, there's a lot of self-reflection that goes on during that process. I think in terms of using films and the take action side, yes, I think that can be more developed, but this goes back to what Nikit was saying, which I potentially could address here or afterwards, is that you're facilitating ways for them to use these films to be empowered. Now, there's lots of different ways that they can do that, but ultimately that needs to be they need to be discovering those ways, and they need to be doing that themselves. There are, you know, I could go on a tour of the universities of the UK and show what we've done and say, right, this is what young people think about community relations. But unless that's what they wanted to do and that's what they felt was important, it wouldn't be what we're about as an organisation. Essentially, it wouldn't really be our core business. So I think working with them to figure out ways that they can use those films for action is part of what we do. But I agree, there's loads of scope, but it really has to come from them. And, you know, that's kind of how we operate in terms of the organisation itself. In terms of your comments about the guys talking about HIV, I had exactly the same reaction. So I got in touch with the office because I was in London at the time, and I said, you know, we can't really put this out there. This is not. They have to agree to do this. You have to make sure that they're cool with this. You have to make sure that that they really are comfortable with this going out on YouTube. Because I mean, there's however many of us, 10 of us here, I mean, that's on YouTube, you know. So they went back and they asked them again, you know, are you sure you want? They showed them it. Are you sure you want to give consent for this? And I said, yeah, take time. Now I think the thing is that they don't think that's shocking because that's reality for them. And if they are going to reflect on what's going on, then that is the reality that they're reflecting on. So as long as they've given consent, they've been given a chance to withdraw that consent, I can't assert editorial on that, because that's about a community figuring out how to overcome attitudes like that, which are typical of men that age in that community. And I totally agree with what you're saying. I really do. It is deeply shocking. But they're not an exceptional bunch of young men.
But that's not the point, because I think it's great that the message can be seen and that people can see and that they can reflect on their communities and the world about these things happening. But there are so many ways of getting the message out there without the specific individuals carrying the potential very large negative consequences to them. Like you could tell them, they're already very marginalized people, and they probably don't even understand the potential consequences unless you actually take the time to explain, look, there are options. We could blur your face. We could do this, we could do that. And
I think, sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
Just being from South Africa, I think that opportunity to be on film or to be somebody, because they're in this huge melting pot of a number of issues, and so I feel somehow there would be a sense of pride that comes with speaking out, and I think maybe that would want them to allow things like this to be put out there. So again, I think it's quite contextually based on the specific community that you're working with, and I sense that sense of pride comes in where they would understand it, but I mean, know what they're speaking about, but given that opportunity to
but also, is it, you know, if you're going to devolve responsibility to a community to deal with a pandemic like HIV, which, according to these guys, it isn't stopping. Can you realistically do that without being completely honest and clear about what the attitudes in that community actually are? They're very uncomfortable for us. We don't want you to be that. We don't want those guys to have those attitudes. I don't want those guys to have those attitudes. I wish they didn't. I really wish they didn't, but they do. So can you really deal with something like HIV, which is a serious problem? If people don't even, most people don't have any idea whether they're HIV positive or not. Can you really deal with it unless you're willing to look openly at that and say, that's not an exceptional bunch of young men, that's just the way that people think. Let's take that, understand that, accept it, and then work on that basis.
I mean, I agree.
Can I just ask you,
Yes.
please allow you to respond? I just want to let somebody else have one question as well.
Okay.
You can talk to another direction. Yeah. Does anybody else have something that they wanted to ask? Well, I'll ask the question. Well, we were talking earlier about the fact that with talking about the children now who are under 18-year-olds, that you haven't been connecting with schools. And I can see the attraction of working in more informal settings. But I'm just wondering if you think about rolling out some of the techniques and making them more available to more young people versus places you have contacts or places you have the time to spend. If you've got any ideas about how you might be able to disseminate some of these tools, and I guess it gets back to something that Nikhil said, do they really need a facilitating adult to be working with them? Or is it possible that something could be a bit more ground up?
Yeah, and I was going to, I think that's a really good time because I wanted to address that. Essentially, there is a ripple effect on this. So as much as it's about training relatively few people, the impact of that is quite wide. So the stage that you want to get to, which is happening, particularly in South Africa, is that they are teaching each other, or they're going to film school and they're bringing that knowledge back into the group. And I think that's very much the next stage needs to be, and was always kind of part of what the organisation was going to do ultimately, was to try to find a way to put the teaching online, or at least set up on an online sort of mentoring and support system, which meant that they could learn and then they could speak to somebody when they got to the stage where they were confused or they needed some help with the learning. I think it's very difficult to go from ground zero with something like this, but I also totally agree that it's not going to be democratizing unless it is kind of disseminated peer-to-peer and it has a life outside of a training environment for 6 months full-time that you know is very, very hands-on and very, very resource-heavy and requires, you know, requires a lot of kind of input from outside. So I think that, I mean, there are really, everybody can, you know, you can really feel that that's possible, and you really know that that's possible, but how that actually is possible, I mean, how you do that is not, we're just not at that point yet. But I do totally agree that, I mean, we've just done online curriculum, so we should be doing it. Yeah, I mean, that really is the next stage, definitely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll wrap the session to a close. Obviously, I will be here at the end of the session for people who want to make connections or carry on their conversations. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at future CMEI events. Thank you.
think you want to be behind a dark screen because this may have potential here if it's real, and they will still be able to convey the message and like raise awareness and not without risking.
How much should be like?
I think that you raised some questions, but enthusiastic.
I just this may be on the website, I don't know. I'm just curious about the age groups of these teenagers. Is this now it's now 16 to 24, 16 to 24, and which really translates into 18 to 22. But we have ones in 11 in the first couple of years.
Alright, I'll see you